Good day, my friends. It's your old pal Jordan the Lion. How are you all doing today? I hope you said great. Today we are going to go visit the grave of the great and very controversial Joan Crawford. Daze with Jordan the Lion, and you all, it begins right now. Joan is buried in the Ferncliff Mausoleum. Also buried inside of here, not only Joan Crawford, but Ed Sullivan, beautiful golden doors. So Joan and Ed Sullivan are actually really close. Joan is in here. I'll show you Ed Sullivan as well. He's right here. Everybody knows Ed Sullivan, famous television show host.
Ladies and gentlemen, the poles on both, the record poles on both sides of the Atlantic have been all turned up here because a fellow out of Odessa, Texas, Roy Orbison, is leading the list with his number. Roy Orbison, let's have a nice welcome to Texas.
Had Elvis and Beatles.
And now, Oh Boy, with Buddy Holland and his Crickets. My Lord, all of my kisses. Elvis Presley.
We came to pay our respects to Joan today, or Lucille LeSueur, as she was born. There she is. Great Joan Crawford Steele and her husband Alfred Steele, who was the head of Pepsi Cola. When she married him, her life pretty much became all about Pepsi. Joan's a really interesting person, though. She had a very, very, very tough life. From the time she was a little girl, her father abandoned the family. Her mother was apparently very immature and was not ready to raise Lucille, so Lucille ended up leaving school when she was in 6th grade and would be in girls' homes and have to waitress. She said she waitressed from the time she was 9 till 13.
Yes, I'm waiting tables in a downtown restaurant.
My mother, a waitress.
I took the only job I could get so you and your sister could eat and have a place to sleep and some clothes on your back.
Nobody ever gave her anything. So her entire life, she would feel like she had to fight for everything that she had and to keep everything that she had. So she started out very poor and would eventually work her way up to being one of the most recognized stars at MGM. MGM at that time was a place that advertised more stars than you can see in the heavens. And she was one of them. She became one of those stars.
Listen, I'm taking my marching orders from Stephen. He seems to be satisfied with this arrangement. So don't force any issues unless you want to cause plenty of trouble.
Joan got her foot in the door by being a dancer. She wasn't particularly beautiful. She wasn't a great dancer, but she worked on it, and it was the days of the Charleston, so she became very good. And that ended up getting her into a show in Chicago, and then someone saw her in a chorus there and offered her some work in New York. So she went to New York and was a chorus girl at the Schubert Theater, and then she was spotted there. Even though she said she never really was featured there, she said she was always in the second row. Someone spotted her, thought maybe she had something, and offered for her to come out to Hollywood. So she ended up going out to Hollywood, and when she got there, she was expecting someone to pick her up. And she said she waited and waited and waited, and finally a guy came over and said, "Are you Lucille LeSueur?" And she said, "Yeah." And he said, "You don't look like the girls that he normally hires, so I didn't know that you were her." And so right away, her first moments in Hollywood, she was already stuck with feeling inadequate compared to the other actresses. She was not someone that they really saw a huge future in, and when they signed her to MGM, they basically just gave her a makeup box and said, "Here, go figure out a look." and they didn't like her name. Louis B. Mayer said her last name sounds like she belongs in a sewer. Let's do a contest to come up with a new name. And so the fans voted for her name to be Joan Arden, but it turned out there was already an actress named Joan Arden who was working her way up in the picture, so they had to come up with the second choice, which was Joan Crawford, and that's what she stuck with. She started out with bit parts and was trying to work her way up the ladder. Just no one really wanted to give her a chance. They just didn't see anything in her. So like I said, she took that makeup kit, developed her lip makeup and her eye makeup, and that became something that she was very easily recognizable for. And then what she did was, when she started getting some roles, one day she snuck into Louis B. Mayer's office apparently and grabbed a script for something that she wanted to work on, and read the whole script, got an idea for the character, and then went in and auditioned and just nailed it. And from then on, that would be basically, you know, her motivation. She wanted to be a star because she had had nothing, and so she wanted to be a great. And so she constantly was finding out about new pictures that MGM was doing, and if she wasn't being considered, she would fight for it. And they didn't, a lot of times people like the directors didn't want to have her because she had broad shoulders. She said when Adrian met her, the dress designer, he said, "I don't think I've ever seen anybody with shoulders that big. I don't know what the heck to do with them." So he said instead of trying to hide them, he just accentuated them with shoulder pads and things like that. And before too long, she started actually getting good parts. Some of my favorite movies that she did were the MGM years, when she was in Grand Hotel with John Barrymore.
Don't you like dancing?
No, not with strangers.
Never?
Never?
And then she did Rain and Strange Cargo with Clark Gable, which she had a whole history with. She never married Clark Gable, but as far as her personal life, she married Douglas Fairbanks Jr. first. She saw him in a play and went and met him afterward, like backstage, and they hit it off and they started dating and got married. And if you were anybody back then, you went to Pick Fair, so then she started being seen at Pick Fair and was around Mary Pickford and Douglas Fairbanks Sr. And then, unfortunately, they tried to have kids, and she lost both attempts at having children, and the marriage suffered. So they ended up going their separate ways, which really hurt her. Then she ended up marrying Franchot Tone, who was another actor, but she really liked manly men who were secure, and he just wasn't that guy in her life. So she ended up moving on from him, and a lot of times would tell people that Clark Gable was actually like the real love of her life, but he just loved women so much as he would come to Joan for advice, and as motherly as she was and as best friend she was to him, they never got together because she said she knew that a marriage with him would never work out. But I did read in a book that when Carol died and he was so heartbroken and was inconsolable, he was basically doing like things. He was out drinking a lot. He was riding his motorcycle at fast speeds, just, basically trying to do anything he could to end his life. He would go and sob with Joan Crawford and basically use her as that mother figure. Joan had tried to have children with both Douglas Fairbanks Jr. and Franchot, but unfortunately she had miscarriages in both marriages. So she ended up adopting 2 children, and Christina and Christopher, and Christina was the one who ended up writing the book that was Mommie Dearest. They made the movie of that. I think a lot of people based their entire impression of Joan Crawford, which I personally don't feel is very accurate and very true. I wasn't there, so I can't, obviously say. But one thing I do know is that I was able to find many interviews with Joan's friends, Joan's assistant for over 20 years, her housekeeper, people that vacationed with the family, because Joan eventually would adopt 2 other daughters, and so she had 4 kids. They would say they never ever saw anything like that. Joan never lost her cool. She never let anybody see her like upset in that way, and she never mistreated her kids in any of their instances. In fact, her assistant said, I must have been living in a different house for 20 years because I never saw any of that happen. The one thing I do know is that when Joan passed away, she didn't leave those 2 kids anything, I believe. So that would possibly be a motivation. But as far as everything I could find, I found where people that worked with her on set would say everybody loved her on set. She got along great with all the people that worked, not only the actors, but the crew. And that she, in any given chance that she could, took the entire family on location if they were filming. If she couldn't take them, she would call the kids every night and speak to each one individually. And then when she would hang up, she would end up breaking down in tears because she missed them so much. And a friend of hers said, why do you do this to yourself every night? And she said, because they're kids and they need to know that I care and love them and I'm thinking about them all the time. So Joan really got her major respect, I think, when she did Mildred Pierce. And that was very interesting because MGM offered her a new contract, but were not offering her anything good as far as new roles. They were giving them to all the younger people. And they were basically telling her, hey, you're past your due. We'll give you what we can. But that really hurt her feelings and insulted her because every time she left the house looking like a movie star, just in case she would run into anyone. So she lived the life fully, and she felt very disrespected. So she went, and basically they told her, hey, if you can find a better deal somewhere else, go find it. So she went to Warner Brothers. Warner offered her half the money, but just because it hurt her feelings so much what MGM was doing, she ended up accepting the offer from Warner, and they gave her a bunch of movies to do that she read the script, thought they were awful, and said, I'm not doing these. I want something good. And the head of Warner at the time said, Joan, this is the best we're gonna give you. You should just do these. And she stuck to her guns, held out for Mildred Pierce. And then when she saw and heard about this, she said, I have to do this picture. But Michael Curtiz, who was the director, hated her and said, there's no way I want that broad-shouldered woman in my movie. So they figured out a way to get him to agree to let her audition, and she auditioned and blew him away and had him in tears. And so he cast her for Mildred Pierce, and then she, of course, won the Oscar.
I'd never have taken the job if I hadn't wanted to keep us all together. Besides, I wanted to learn the business the best way possible.
I saw an interview with someone who worked with her on a movie, and he said, I never saw someone as good as her. He said, you think that she was just one thing, but he said, no, she could really do it all. He said, I remember one time her asking the cameraman, hey, do you think it'd look good if I cried here? And he said, yeah, I think it would. And she said, okay, which eye, left eye or right eye? And he said, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. She could actually control which side a single tear was gonna drop out. Now, her name here, you see Joan Crawford Steele. She ended up meeting Alfred Steele, who was the head of Pepsi Cola, and he was exactly what she needed. He was self-assured in his own personality, who he was as a person. He wasn't trying to be an actor, so he didn't care about what he looked like. He was very professional. He was a man. And she fell right into that. She would go everywhere. He was going all the plant openings that they were having. She would go if she was having any business meetings. She would insist that cases of Pepsi Cola were there because she wanted everybody there drinking it. I mean, Pepsi Cola became her life during that time. And they would take the entire family on trips, opening up these plants. And then sadly, as you can see in 1959, Alfred passed away. And Joan just basically did what Joan does, which is she went from being supporting wife and helping him make decisions in the business to then wanting to go back and do movies again. So she started doing, in the 60s, she did all those horror movies. And she did, of course, like What Happened to Baby Jane. That was a great one. And a lot of times they were only in the theater for 1 week, but she was a movie star, and that was really what made her feel, knowing that her public still cared and they would still watch. That's what made her feel fulfilled. So sadly, at the end, Joan ended up having a heart attack and she passed away in her apartment in Lenox Hill, New York. She had already given away her dog, her Shih Tzu, because she was too weak to care for it, and she left her 2 youngest children, Cindy and Kathy, $77,500 each from her $2 million estate, and she disinherited Christopher and Christina. She actually stipulated in there that she says, I leave them nothing and the reasons they know. So it was sad. I mean, from everything I saw or everything that I could find as far as interviews or read interviews, she had housekeepers and things like that helped take care of the house, but she was dead set on her kids being self-sufficient. And so they all had chores from the earliest ages. They had to do their own dishes and things like that. And it was said that Christina was always wanting to be Joan and was very, very jealous of Joan. And Joan would even make calls for Christina to help her get acting work. I know she had problems with Christopher where she had to send him to military school. But yeah, it's what I feel like whenever you mention Joan Crawford now to anybody, they always just immediately think of Mommie Dearest and the coat hangers and all that stuff. But I think it's really unfair to make those accusations about someone after they died, and then to find so many people in her life that said that was not, including the 2 youngest twins. I mean, her one twin said, none of that ever happened. My mother never lost her cool with us, ever. That just didn't happen. Joan Crawford was pretty much the definition of movie star. She lived it. She loved it. She gave back. She loved meeting fans. She was... For that time, she was a true movie star. So rest in peace, Miss Joan Crawford Steele. Thank you everyone for watching. We'll see you next time. Have a great night and goodbye.